I was talking to a friend of mine recently, and they said that Mercy feels way too dependent on her team and therefore limited by her team in the Mercy player's ability to win games and climb the ladder. We were talking, and they mentioned that sometimes, as Mercy, they felt that their best option was for them to just get stuck healing the support against something like Dive. And then later that same day, I was asked a question by one of my students that basically boiled down to trading backlines as Mercy, why it's important, and how to do it and what it looks like. And so, because this isn't the first time I've been asked questions like this, and because I wanted to start adding some educational content to this channel, I figured I'd make this quick, simple video to try and explain with some visual aid why Mercy isn't as dependent or helpless as some might think, and how Mercy's own individual decision making can change the course of a fight through the example of trading backlines. Okay, so let's take this hypothetical scenario. Um, For those that may not know, pretty much every point on every Overwatch map can be overly simplified, basically boiled down to this general design of 3 lanes, right? You have the main, which is usually the middle, and then you have the left flank and you have the right flank. Obviously there's turns and high ground and lots of cover, etc., etc. But this is just, a very general outline of what the map would look like. Okay. Um, so now let's kind of populate this very fake map. So your tank, your DPS, second DPS, and then your other support. So let's say your Ana, and then you as the Mercy. Okay. And then they have Monkey, DPS, DPS, and 2 supports. Okay. It really doesn't matter where each person is. This is just to give an example. Okay. And then I'm going to use this line to show the delineation between the two teams. Okay. So in this scenario, right, the monkey's diving your support. Let's say Ana, someone who's relatively immobile. He's alone. It's not a very good diver engage, but that's what's happening for the purpose of this thought experiment. Okay. So one common line of thought is that if you continue to heal your Ana, right, you just keep healing your Ana, keep yellow beaming her. If you continue to heal your Ana, you're essentially guaranteeing that your Ana survives the monkey's engage, and that would obviously be the correct choice because you've saved your Ana, and that's obviously valuable. And no one's arguing that that would be valuable. And if you go to beam a different teammate, you don't really know for sure whether or not that teammate will kill someone with, damage boost or the healing that you're providing to compensate for the fact that your Ana is now dying or slash out of the fight. And I totally understand that this is where this feeling of being limited by the hero's kit can come into play because, the only thing you feel like you can do is to guarantee your own value is to yellow beam your Ana and hope it works out, aka put the fate of the fight into someone else's hands. But one thing that I think a lot of players don't consider is the opportunity cost of their own decisions. In other words, yellow beaming your Ana does give you something, yes, and keeps your Ana up. But what does it cost you in order to get that thing? Okay. By choosing to only yellow beam your Ana, you are also guaranteeing that for however long it takes for the Ana v Monkey situation to resolve, your entire team will be without support players. In other words, the Winston is now occupying both support players instead of just one. That means that any damage taken by your team as this is happening matters a lot more, and the other 3 members of your team will eventually be forced to back up or give space, right? So they're gonna have to run back, as they take damage. And it doesn't even matter how good or bad either team is, right? It doesn't really matter how good or bad the individual members of each team are. Eventually, shots will land. Even the lowest of the low bronze players will at some point hit shots. They don't have to. This is all just to say they don't have to even be good to force your team to back up because the damage is more permanent, so to speak. Okay. So as your team is backing up, this allows the other 4 members of the enemy team to push up and take space. Right, so they come here, push up, push up. And the longer this goes on, the more likely it is for your teammates to straight up die, since the enemy team has supports and yours doesn't. So by choosing to take what seems like the 100% guaranteed value option of just healing your Ana, making sure she stays up, you're also guaranteeing that the enemy monkey has actually gotten even more value, right? He's taking up the resources of both supports, and he's making space for his team by forcing your team to back up as a result of not having any supports, right? So now this purple line gets moved back as well, and your team loses space. Not to mention that your team would need to use cooldowns and whatnot to give that space and run away safely. Now, on the other hand, if you were to apply your beam to the rest of your team doesn't have to immediately give space and be afraid. So maybe now as Mercy, you are damage boosting and healing your DPS, right? Point, it doesn't really matter who. The point is that, you know, you get to do this because you are not stuck pocketing your Ana. Okay. Because of this, three general categories of events can happen. Okay. First, and ideally, your team is good. Maybe they're really good, and they recognize that the enemy team doesn't have a tank. So they actively push in and get kills with your damage boost and your heals, outright winning the fight. Right? They just sweep all these guys. Okay, that's great. That'd be great if that happened. Okay, that's one possibility. Okay. Second possibility is maybe your team is not so good. They don't recognize their opportunity to get aggressive and proactive and get these picks, but because they have your healing and your damage boost, they got to hold on to their strong positioning and their space, which allows to get for at least one kill, which is at the very worst an even trade, right? The very, very worst being that your Ana dies to the monkey. It's a very worst an even trade, okay? And then the third category is that your team gets 0 kills, but again, holds space thanks to you applying your beam to the rest of the team, okay? No matter which of these three categories happens, the Winston that's in your team will eventually be forced out because your team has space, it has the positioning to be able to force him out. So, right, so maybe he jumps back to his team, or he jumps to go get a health pack, whatever it is. Again, he has no support while the rest of your team does. So eventually, the monkey will have to leave. He can't stay there forever. Notice it doesn't really matter whether or not the Ana survives the monkey engage using her own toolkit. Well, because she still has sleep or nade, and so I'm just ignoring that. But importantly, the point is that if you only heal Ana, right, you are forcing your team to have to give space and the lines of sight and all that kind of stuff, right? It makes the enemy team more lethal, whereas holding the space makes your team more lethal and more well protected. And this is really what trading backlines as Mercy means or looks like. Yes, your Ana or other support may die to the dive, but instead of falling back and giving space to the dive, like in this left scenario, okay, you push forward and support the rest of your team so that you can at least hope to trade out evenly. Either way, the important thing is at the end of the day, your team gets to hold the space and the positioning they started with, right? Even in the worst scenario, this purple line did not move. Now, obviously, a real game is going to be a lot more complex and nuanced than this. I'm not saying, never heal your Ana when she gets dove. I'm definitely not saying that. And I'm not saying that you'll never get help from your other teammates, right? Like the whole concept of peel. But the principle stands, right? The longer you only heal your Ana, the more your decision forces the entire situation of the fight closer to the left side of this diagram. This very poorly drawn diagram. But again, this is a very, very common question, very common concept to wrestle with. And I think that the decision to beam someone other than your Ana or your other support getting dove, I think that decision being viewed as more of a gamble stems from a mentality that's too rooted in the whole, less deaths, more kills wins games mantra. I would urge that those who are just now coming into contact with this concept to view the game from a more positional mindset. Space is what allows and facilitates everything else that happens in the fight. You know, picks, kills, ultimates, all that kind of stuff. And heals slash supporting is what allows and facilitates the taking and holding of that space. In reality, the 100% guaranteed value that you think you would be getting from keeping your yellow beam on the Ana in this scenario is actually more of a gamble on whether or not the rest of your team will be fine. And it's a gamble with worse odds. Although this was a very simplified overview, I hope I was able to explain this concept well enough that this makes sense. And in the very least, I wanted to show how much the decision of who to give your beam to and who not to give your beam to can drastically change how the rest of a fight, and therefore a game, turns out. If you have any other questions, please feel free to ask away in the comments. Let me know if there are any other concepts you might want explained, or if you have any suggestions on how I can explain things more clearly. Hope you enjoyed.